Alex, I heard that Airbnb has switched from using American AI models like OpenAI to using Alibaba, a Chinese big tech behemoth, for their customer service. So, why is that happening and what does this mean for the broader sector in the US?
The short reason why it's happening is that Alibaba makes open source models. The entire Chinese AI sector has been big on open source as its way of competing with the large American labs. If you are trying to buy a product from Anthropic or OpenAI or Google, then what they're trying to sell you is API access to their cloud hosted AI tools. That's great in a lot of ways, right? It means you don't need to worry about provisioning it. It means you only pay for what you use. It means you can tinker around to a certain extent. But if you're a big company or if you have quite specific engineering needs, that might not be enough. Using an open source model for a company like Airbnb has a lot of advantages. It can be cheaper because you can download the model and you can run it on whatever hardware you can get your hands on, or you can turn to a cloud provider that's happy to undercut a company like OpenAI or Anthropic. It also means that you can hack around with it, right? If you want to fine tune the AI model to, I don't know, speak in exactly the version of English that you want, then you can do that with an open source model. API tools from companies like OpenAI offer some stuff like it, and with canny prompting, you can do an awful lot, but it's not the same as changing the underlying model. And that's what an open source offering from a company like Alibaba lets you do. It's worth saying that some of the American labs now have their own open source offerings. I think OpenAI's is called GPTOSS, and Google sells its Gemma open source model. Those aren't the best things the companies make. Whereas Alibaba, its top tier frontier model called Quen is open source. You can download the weights and run it on whatever hardware you have. That's the appeal to companies like Airbnb.
I was going to say last year. Would it be last year when DeepSeek disrupted everything? So it was basically about this time last year. And basically, it came on the market. It was way cheaper. And then there was this massive um, kind of shakeup in the US markets. And, investors were asking, hey, hang on a second, why are we funding, why are we spending so much money on you guys when actually that these guys have made it so much cheaper? So how did DeepSeek manage to create something that was, very good for just so much less money than OpenAI? Is it just because, in Silicon Valley, they throw money around?
That does seem to be a little part of the story, right? As of this time last year, it definitely felt like large AI labs in America were swimming in money and they were doing fantastic cutting edge research. But that research was about how to use as much computing power as you can get your hands on to produce the strongest possible model. DeepSeek was doing research on how to use a very constrained number of NVIDIA chips to produce a strong model, but one that could be done with the 20,000 or so chips that they could get their hands on. This was even before the real embargoes from America started to bite, but nonetheless, DeepSeek was supported by a bunch of computing hardware that the hedge fund it's attached to had managed to get its hands on. Wanting it more is a big part of it, but then the sort of less favorable side of the narrative for the Chinese companies is that there's an element of fast follower in what DeepSeek was able to do. For instance, there is a technique called distillation that you hear about in the AI world sometimes. And what distillation is it's training an AI model on the outputs of another AI model. If you want an AI system that is able to produce responses like ChatGPT 4.1, which was the pinnacle at the time from OpenAI, there's a lot of ways you can do that. You can try and mimic the research that you know they're doing. You can try and mimic the data mix that you know they've got in their training data. Or you can ask a million questions of GPT 4.1, save the answers, and feed that into your own system as training data. And that seems to be a big part of what DeepSeek did. They distilled bigger, more powerful models into something that was accessible, fast to run, and had the efficiency updates that they'd invented in their own labs. And I don't want to do those efficiency updates down, right? They were coding hooks into these NVIDIA chips that no one in America bothered to do. They were throwing away NVIDIA's own programming language because it wasn't powerful enough and writing what's known as to the metal, right? Sending specific instructions to specific components on these chips because that was the only way they could get the efficiency they needed out. It was a phenomenal engineering achievement, but one that was driven out of need.
And so, how are these companies getting funded? So you mentioned the Chinese big tech companies. We understand where Alibaba's money comes from. With DeepSeek, there's a massive hedge fund with lots of cash behind it. What about everybody else? If we're not sure about what the business model is, it's open source. Who's paying the bills and why?
So currently, the funding question is a lot like most of the American labs. They're being funded by investors who are hoping to earn a profit down the line. That's an unsatisfactory answer because the question is, why are they going to earn a profit? They do have revenue sources. So some of it is the classic offerings from open source. If you want to build something on Z.AI's GLM5 coding AI that's coming out shortly, then you can pay them for a service contract and their engineers will help you get it up and running. Or you can just use it through their API. Although they offer it for download to run for free, they also let you use their hardware. And if you're just tooling around, maybe it's worth it. In that narrative, you can see the open source releases as something akin to advertising. Yes, lots of people download and use it, but it doesn't cost the company any money if Airbnb uses their models. And it means that they're known for making good models and maybe eventually they sell the API access themselves. I think there's kind of a bigger question here, which is whether open source is a short-term thing for these businesses. There's one potential future where kind of something like DeepSeek or Alibaba's Qwen becomes a household name, if not in the UK, then maybe in China, maybe in one of the many other nations that these companies are targeting. And if it becomes a household name, then they get to move to a bit more of a traditional closed model. Perhaps they don't put their best versions up for open source, or they charge quite substantial fees to download them. Those are all options that I'm sure they're considering. One of the other problems that they've got, all of these companies, is that within China, the software as a service market never really took off. There's some historical reasons for that, right? Software piracy was massive in China around the era of boxed software sales, which meant that when moving to the cloud came up and paying a monthly fee per seat, Chinese enterprises kind of looked at, well, why should we do that? We're not used to paying for software. We'll just carry on using the free stuff that we've downloaded anyway. And so now these AI labs are having to teach effectively their customers a whole new way of doing business. That's a real hindrance to earning cash compared to the American world where everyone knows how to provision a server on AWS and they can move straight to making profit or making less of a loss as it may be.
So most of our audience is in the US, and then the second market is in the UK. So what would you tell us? What should we try in terms of Chinese models? And you're speaking to people who probably are using ChatGPT and are using Claude, but are not doing very, very complicated things with them.
So I think in terms of the non-techie world right now, a lot of these models are very much targeting engineers. You can head to the website Hugging Face, which is a French-American company.
Yeah.
So French-American, yeah, which hosts lots of these models that you can play around with. To a certain extent, what you'll find when you're prodding and pulling them is that any given AI system is going to feel much like any others at that first contact with them. But for seeing both the breadth of offerings available from large Chinese labs and the downstream impact of being able to hack around with them, someone like Hugging Face is a good place to experiment. So you'll see not only Alibaba's top flight Qwen models and its Qwen image models, but you'll also see versions of all of those that have been fine tuned to produce really good anime style visuals for the image models, or to speak other languages, or to run on mobile phones. All of anything that you can do with an AI model, you'll be able to find done to an open source model. And I think it's understanding that the world of AI systems is so much bigger than kind of the offerings from three large American labs. That's the best thing to get into your head. It's you're not just waiting for a big company to release something you need. There is probably someone who's hacked about with an open source model and made it already.